Some flee because they hope that one day they will be able to lead a better life. Others just want to escape their usually just punishment. The reasons why people decide to flee are extremely diverse and exciting. That's why we're showing you the most extraordinary escapes of all time today. Included are spectacular maneuvers and crazy chases. It's going to be very exciting, so stay tuned here at Wonderlane. Oh, and feel free to write us in the comments what you've ever had to flee from. We are curious. Number 6. On September 16th, 1979, one of the most spectacular escapes in the German Democratic Republic history took place. At that time, the Streltsik and Wetzel families from Posneck in Thuringia dared to escape from the GDR across the heavily guarded inner German border to West Germany. And they did so in a homemade hot air balloon, and despite the fact that neither of them had any experience with aviation. Instead, Günther Wetzel read about a hot air balloon meeting in New Mexico by chance a year earlier. From that moment on, it was clear to him that he would sew such a balloon himself and dare to attempt flight. Together with his friend Peter Streltsik, he then began secret work on the balloon based only on estimates. Nevertheless, the second balloon already proved to be an airworthy, and Peter Streltsik ventured a first escape attempt with his son. But they did not keep an eye on the weather, and the balloon sank to the ground over the restricted area due to the damp weather. So the escape attempt failed, and the Stasi was on their heels from now on. They realized that escape was the only way out, and within the next 5 weeks, they sewed a new balloon, the envelope of which was 28 meters high and 20 meters wide. With this balloon, the families and their total of 4 children finally dared the spectacular escape on a clear full moon night in September. A meadow near Oberlemnitz served as the launch site, but during the ascent, the balloon caught fire and the families were in danger of crashing. Just in time, they were able to extinguish the fire, and the flight lasted 28 minutes, covering a distance of 18 kilometers. The balloon landed in a wooded area near Nyla in the district of Hof, and thus the escape was indeed successful. Later, it was clear that the escape of the two families was the only escape to the west that was carried out with a hot air balloon. The balloon that was used is the largest ever produced in Europe, and is now in the Museum of Bavarian History in Regensburg. Number 5. Many legends and stories have grown up around the prison island of Alcatraz, which is located 2 kilometers off the coast of San Francisco. Probably the most spectacular occurred on June 11th, 1962, and is still referred to today as the escape from Alcatraz. At that time, the two brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, and a third inmate named Frank Morris made a spectacular escape attempt from the maximum security prison, which until then had been considered absolutely escape-proof. To do so, the escaped trio had previously spent years enlarging the ventilation openings in their cells with the help of prison cutlery. On the night of June 11th, they finally climbed through the openings and escaped through a utility corridor behind their cells. When guards came to wake them up the next morning, they found only 3 homemade heads made of paper mache, wax, paint, and real hair. Morris, as well as the Angling brothers, had been gone for several hours by then. They are said to have fled the island in a homemade rubber dinghy made of raincoats, and have been considered missing ever since. For many years, it was assumed that they had died in the floods of the Pacific, but in 2013, a letter was suddenly received at a police station in San Francisco. Allegedly, John Anglin personally wrote the letter, and in it, he described that all 3 inmates had survived the escape. In the meantime, Morris and his brother Clarence had died, and he was also in very bad health due to cancer. The FBI reopened the investigation, but was never able to determine the authenticity of the letter. John Anglin would be 91 years old today. Number 4. Let's continue with former football player and actor O.J. Simpson. The running back, who also became an international superstar with the Naked Gun movies, engaged in what was probably the most curious car chase to date on June 17, 1994. It was even the first real car chase to be broadcast live on TV via helicopter. At that time, Simpson had been accused of taking the lives of his former wife Nicole and her boyfriend, waiter Ronald Goldman. Simpson actually planned to turn himself into police voluntarily at 11 a.m., but he did not appear. As a result, the football star was put on the wanted list, and at 6:45 p.m. local time, police spotted Simpson in a white Ford Bronco owned by his friend Al Cowlings. It began a 90-kilometer-long odyssey through LA. The curious thing was that the SUV drove for minutes completely unmolested over the highway and was followed at a proper distance by several police cars. The officers inside made no effort to stop the car because Simpson had written a suicide note and allegedly had a gun in the car.
Now we're okay, but you gotta tell the police to just back off. He's still alive, but he got a gun to his head.
Authorities feared the superstar might take his own life, so they did not intervene. Instead, helicopters from local TV stations circled over the city and broadcast the chase live on TV. Some stations even interrupted the opening game of the World Cup, which was taking place in Chicago at the same time, for this. And in the end, over 90 million viewers watched the escape of their idol. Fans also eventually gathered on the streets and cheered for the car, and presenters addressed O.J. Simpson directly over the radio. The situation was completely bizarre, but eventually the chase ended unspectacularly in front of his apartment building. Simpson got out of the car and surrendered to the officers. His legendary trial ended with an acquittal. Number 3. Let's move on to Nicholas Garrison from the US state of Ohio. The young man was on trial in Hillsborough for allegedly possessing and distributing a large amount of mind-expanding substances. It was already clear that he would have to go to jail for the next 6 months, and the judge had already passed his sentence. But as a law enforcement officer was about to handcuff him to lead him out of the courtroom, it happened. Garrison broke free and took flight. 2 men immediately gave chase, but the felon was faster. Images from the surveillance cameras show how Garrison first ran past an elderly woman, stormed into the stairwell, and tried to escape down the stairs. At that moment, one of the officers decided to take a spectacular action. He unceremoniously jumped over the railing to stop Garrison on the stairs. But the action went wrong, because instead of stopping the fugitive, he hit the steps and slid headfirst down the stairs. Garrison actually managed to escape, and the officer had to go to the hospital with 4 broken ribs. In the meantime, the fugitive could be caught again. Number 2. Let us now turn to Joseph Kim, who took upon himself a life-threatening escape as a young boy. Kim lived as an orphan in North Korea, which is one of the dictatorships with the least respect for human rights. After his father died during the Great Famine in the 1990s, and his mother and sister disappeared forever while trying to escape to China, the boy was left to fend for himself. He had no money, not enough to eat, and no perspective. So, he took a risky journey, even though he had to fear that he would probably not survive the escape attempt. A justified fear, because North Korea has a 4-kilometer-wide buffer zone on its borders with South Korea, which is partially mined. In addition, the border zone is secured by barbed wire fences. So, he was left with only one option, and he fled across a frozen lake to China. In fact, he managed to escape, but a terrible time began for him in China. The Chinese government considered North Korean refugees to be illegal migrants, and although Joseph Kim was still a child at the time, he was threatened with deportation at any time if he was caught. He eventually learned of an underground organization in South Korea that cared for refugees. With their help, he finally got in touch with American missionaries who enabled him to leave for the USA. Today, Joseph Kim is a young man studying at a renowned university. Nothing stands in the way of a successful future, but he still thinks often of his sister and his mother. He hopes that one day he will see them again, even though to this day he does not know if they are even still alive. Let's move on to number 1. The story of Yusra Mardini, now 23 years old, gets under your skin. The young woman grew up as the daughter of a swimming coach in Syria and had just one dream as a child. She wanted to stand on the podium as a swimmer at the Olympic Games one day. But while the little girl was training for her dream, war suddenly broke out in Syria. The family initially wanted to stay in their home country, but when an unexploded bomb fell in their swimming pool, the parents wanted to get their 2 daughters out of the country. On August 12, 2015, Yusra Mardini and her older sister, Sarah, fled to Istanbul via Beirut with their father's cousins. Smugglers then put them in Izmir with 18 other people in an inflatable boat that was actually only designed for 7 people. They were then supposed to take the small boat to the Greek island of Lesbos, which is at least 9 kilometers away from the mainland. But during the crossing, disaster struck. The outboard engine failed, and through a leak, the inflatable boat filled with water. It threatened to sink, and although everyone tried to scoop the water out of the boat, there was little hope. So finally, Yusra and her sister Sarah jumped into the water to lighten the boat so they could stabilize it. Together with 2 other men, they pulled the inflatable boat for hours through the night to the rescuing shore. She later made it to Berlin via the Balkan route, where the then 17-year-old started a new life and joined a swimming team. And less than a year later, her dream would also come true. In June 2016, the International Olympic Committee named Mardini as one of 10 people to compete for the refugee Olympic athletes team at the Summer Games in Rio de Janeiro. Meanwhile, she is even a UN Special Ambassador and a real inspiration for many other people. And that's it for our video. Feel free to write us in the comments which escape you found particularly spectacular, or which escape you can think of. Otherwise, like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to Wonderlane for more videos like this. See you next time, here at Wonderlane.